The frozen discovery. The wind howled across the barren landscape like a living thing, cutting through Jace's protective gear with icy fingers. Snow swirled endlessly from the gray sky, burying the twisted remains of ancient machinery that dotted this forgotten world. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he trudged forward, each step sinking deep into the pristine white blanket that covered everything. Jace had been exploring this dead planet for 3 days now, searching for salvageable technology or fuel cells, anything that might make this expedition worthwhile. The corporation that sent him here promised good money for rare materials, but so far, he'd found nothing but frozen wasteland and the skeletal remains of some long-lost civilization. A sound pierced the howling wind, weak, desperate, almost like a cry for help. Jace stopped, his gloved hand instinctively moving to the scanner on his belt. The sound came again, muffled but unmistakably real. Following the noise, he approached a pile of twisted metal and debris, partially buried under layers of ice and snow. Carefully, he began moving the sharp fragments aside, his movements deliberate and cautious. That's when he saw it, a small creature trapped beneath the wreckage, its gray fur matted with snow and what looked like dried blood. The animal was barely moving, its bright golden eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. It was unlike anything Jace had ever seen. About the size of a house cat but with the lean build of a predator, it had elongated ears and sharp teeth visible even in its weakened state. Despite its small size, something about those golden eyes suggested intelligence far beyond that of an ordinary animal. The creature let out another weak cry, and Jace felt something stir in his chest. Without thinking, he shrugged off his thermal jacket and gently wrapped it around the shivering animal. To his surprise, it didn't resist or try to bite him. Instead, it simply stared at him with those remarkable eyes. "Easy there," Jace whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm not going to hurt you." As he carefully lifted the creature into his arms, he noticed something unusual around its neck, a small collar made of some unknown material, with a symbol that glowed faintly in the dim light. The marking was intricate, almost ceremonial, unlike anything he'd seen in his years of exploration. The storm was getting worse, and Jace knew he needed to get back to his shelter quickly. Holding the small creature close to his chest, he began the treacherous journey back through the blizzard, feeling its tiny heartbeat against his ribs and wondering what he had just gotten himself into. Unlikely companions. Back in the warmth of his small outpost, Jace placed the creature on a soft blanket near the heating unit. His hands were numb from the cold, but he managed to fill a bowl with clean water and set it nearby. The animal, he had started thinking of it as female, though he couldn't say why, sniffed cautiously at the water before drinking with obvious relief. For the first time, Jace got a good look at his unexpected guest. Her fur was a beautiful silver gray that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light, and despite her obvious exhaustion, there was something regal about her bearing. The glowing collar around her neck pulsed gently, its alien symbols shifting and changing in patterns he couldn't decipher. "What are you?" he murmured, settling into a chair nearby. The creature, he decided to call her Raya, lifted her head at the sound of his voice. There was an alertness in her golden eyes that suggested she understood far more than she should. That first night, Jace barely slept. Every small sound made him wake, half expecting to find Raya transformed into some terrible predator. But she never moved from her spot on the blanket, her breathing steady and peaceful. When morning came, she was watching him with those enigmatic eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't seem afraid. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Jace would share his rations with her, she seemed to prefer the protein bars to anything else, and she would follow him around the small shelter with growing confidence. She was learning to trust him, and he found himself looking forward to her soft chirping sounds when she was content. But something strange was happening. Raya was growing, and not gradually like a normal animal would. Each day she seemed noticeably larger, her movements more coordinated and purposeful. Her claws had grown sharper, her muscles more defined. Most unsettling of all, she had begun to study his equipment with obvious interest, tilting her head as she watched him work on his communication console as if she understood its function. One evening, as Jace was updating his log entries, Raya suddenly tensed. Her ears flattened against her head, and she moved to the small window, staring out at the darkening sky with obvious agitation. Jace followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the endless expanse of snow and the first stars beginning to appear. "What is it, girl?" he asked softly, but Raya remained focused on the sky, a low growl building in her throat. It wasn't until he checked his long-range scanner that Jace understood her concern. There were ships in orbit, multiple vessels conducting what appeared to be systematic search patterns. These weren't merchant ships or casual explorers. These were military craft, and they were looking for something specific. As if sensing his discovery, Raya turned from the window and looked directly at him, her golden eyes filled with an intelligence that made his breath catch. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, someone was looking for her. And Jace had the growing suspicion that finding her might be the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. Royal blood. The ships arrived 3 days later, sleek and predatory against the pale sky. Jace watched through his scope as they landed in perfect formation about a kilometer from his outpost. These weren't human vessels, their design was too elegant, too organic, like they had been grown rather than built. Raya had grown again overnight, now standing nearly knee-high with the lean grace of her species becoming more apparent. Her golden eyes tracked the ships with an intensity that made Jace's skin crawl. She knew what they were, and more importantly, she knew they were here for her. "We need to figure out what's going on," Jace muttered, pulling up his scanner's analysis of her collar. This time, the translation protocols managed to decode a few more symbols. What he read made his blood run cold: property of the Empress consort. Royal bloodline. Last of the royal guard. Before he could process this fully, his communication console crackled to life. The voice that emerged was definitely not human, melodic but with an underlying authority that made every word feel like a command. "Human settlement, you have something that belongs to us. Surrender the royal princess immediately, and you will not be harmed." Jace stared at Raya, who had moved to sit beside his chair, her posture unnaturally straight and dignified. A princess. He had been caring for alien royalty without knowing it, sharing his rations with the heir to what was apparently a galactic empire. "I repeat," the voice continued, "return Princess Kaya to us, and you will be compensated for your assistance." Kaya. Even her real name sounded regal. Jace looked down at her, and she gazed back with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In that moment, he realized that she had been waiting for this, waiting for him to understand who she really was. The next transmission was different, harsher. "You have 1 hour to comply, human." The Empress grows impatient. Jace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's frozen atmosphere. The Galactic Empress, he had heard whispers of her in the outer colonies, stories of a ruler whose empire spanned dozens of star systems, whose word was absolute law across half the galaxy. And he had been playing house with her daughter. But as he looked at Kaya, he saw not a princess but the small, injured creature he had rescued from certain death. She had trusted him when she was vulnerable, had chosen to stay when she could have revealed herself at any time. The collar around her neck pulsed brighter, and somehow he understood that it wasn't just a symbol of her status, it was a beacon, calling her people home. "What do you want me to do?" he asked her quietly. Kaya stood and walked to the window, her gaze fixed on the alien ships. Then she did something that shocked him. She placed her paw on the communication console and activated it herself. When she spoke, her voice was no longer the soft chirps and growls he had grown accustomed to. It was clear, commanding, and undeniably royal. "I am Princess Kaya of the Nexian Empire," she said, her words causing Jace to stumble backward in amazement. "The human Jace is under my protection. Any harm that comes to him will be considered an act of war against the crown." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the alien ships began to power down their weapons. Jace realized that his life had just changed forever, and there was no going back to the simple existence of a planetary explorer. He was now connected to the fate of an empire, and it all started with a cry in the cold. The Empress's arrival. The largest ship landed with barely a whisper, its hull shimmering with an energy field that made the air itself seem to bend around it. Jace stood beside Kaya, still struggling to accept that the creature he had been sharing his meals with was actually an alien princess who could speak perfect standard. "She's coming," Kaya said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of affection and nervousness. "My mother doesn't travel often, but when she does." The ship's ramp descended, and what emerged was unlike anything Jace had ever imagined. The Empress was magnificent, nearly 7 feet tall, with the same silver-gray fur as Kaya but marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. Her eyes were the same golden color as her daughter's, but where Kaya's held warmth and curiosity, the Empress's burned with the weight of absolute authority. She was accompanied by what Jace assumed were her royal guards, beings similar to her but smaller, wearing armor that gleamed like liquid metal. They moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, and their eyes never stopped scanning for potential threats. The Empress stopped just outside Jace's shelter, her gaze fixed on her daughter. When she spoke, her voice carried across the frozen landscape without any need for amplification. "Kaya," she said, and the single word held volumes of relief, love, and barely contained fury. "You have been missing for 6 rotations. The entire fleet has been searching." Kaya moved forward, her posture becoming more regal with each step. Jace realized this was the first time he had seen her true nature, not the injured cub or the curious companion, but a princess returning to her rightful place. "Mother," Kaya replied, and there was genuine affection in her voice. "I was delayed." The Empress's attention turned to Jace, and he felt the full weight of her scrutiny. He had faced dangerous predators on a dozen worlds, survived equipment failures in the depths of space, but nothing had prepared him for being evaluated by the ruler of a galactic empire. "You are the human who protected my daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "I found her injured," Jace replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I couldn't just leave her." Something shifted in the Empress's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around her eyes. "Could you not? Many would have. The galaxy is not kind to the lost and wounded." Kaya stepped closer to Jace, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by her mother. "He shared his food with me, mother. Kept me warm when I was dying. He could have traded my collar for enough credits to live comfortably for years, but he chose to care for me instead." The Empress studied Jace for a long moment, then made a decision that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. "Jace of the human colonies," she said formally, "you have saved the life of the heir to the Nexian Empire. Name your reward, and it shall be yours." Jace looked at Kaya, who was watching him with obvious hope in her golden eyes. He thought of all the things he could ask for: wealth, ships, an entire planet to call his own. But only one thing mattered to him now. "I want to make sure she's safe," he said simply. "That's all I've ever wanted." The Empress tilted her head, a gesture so similar to Kaya's that Jace almost smiled. "Indeed? Then you shall have your wish, human. You will serve as her personal guardian, bonded to the royal house until death or until she releases you from service." Jace felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just an explorer or a salvager. He was now part of something far greater than himself, bound to protect an alien princess whose friendship had already changed his life forever. A new beginning. 6 months later, Jace stood on the observation deck of the Nexian flagship, watching stars stream past at impossible speeds. His simple explorer's gear had been replaced with armor crafted from materials he couldn't even name, and his title was now Guardian of the Royal Heir, a position that, according to the palace historians, had never been held by a non-Nexian before. Kaya had grown into her full adult form, standing nearly as tall as Jace himself, her silver fur now marked with the blue patterns that indicated her coming of age. But despite her regal bearing and the respect shown to her by every member of the crew, she still made the same soft chirping sounds when she was particularly pleased about something, usually when Jace brought her the human food she had developed a taste for during their time together. The council is still arguing about it, she said, joining him at the massive viewport. Some of them think Mother was too hasty in naming a human as royal guardian. And what do you think? Jace asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Kaya's golden eyes gleamed with amusement. I think they're forgetting that you saved my life when I was powerless, and that you're the only being in the galaxy who has ever shared his ration bars with royalty. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the cosmos unfold before them. Jace's new life was nothing like the solitary existence he had known as an explorer, but he found he didn't miss the isolation. He had purpose now, and more importantly, he had family, even if that family happened to rule half the known galaxy. The Empress wants to see you, Kaya said eventually. She's in the tactical center. Jace made his way through corridors that still seemed impossibly vast to him, past Nexian nobles who nodded respectfully and guards who had come to accept his presence among them. The Empress stood before a holographic display showing star charts that spanned dozens of systems, her advisors updating her on various matters of state. Ah, Jace, she said without turning around. Perfect timing. We've received a distress signal from the Kepler system. Pirates have been attacking civilian transports. You want me to investigate? Jace asked. I want you to accompany Kaya on her first official mission as heir to the throne, the Empress replied, finally turning to face him. She's requested you specifically, and I believe the experience will be educational for both of you. Jace felt a familiar thrill, the excitement of heading into the unknown, but this time with a purpose greater than simple exploration. He thought back to that frozen planet where this had all begun, to the small, injured creature he had pulled from the wreckage. That moment of compassion had led him here, to a place he never could have imagined. As if summoned by his thoughts, Kaya appeared in the doorway, now wearing the ceremonial armor of a Nexian royal on her first official mission. She looked every inch the princess she was born to be, but when she saw him, she smiled with the same warmth she had shown as a cub. Ready for another adventure? She asked. Jace adjusted his own armor and checked his weapons. Always. Together, they headed toward the hangar bay where their ship waited, the human guardian and the alien princess, bound by friendship and duty to face whatever challenges the galaxy might throw at them. Behind them, the Empress watched with approval, knowing that her daughter was in the best possible hands. The stars held countless dangers and wonders, but they would face them as they had faced everything else, together. The end.